Today I will be making Britain's very first Union flag. It was designed around 1606 and later adopted as the national flag in 1707. The design is a combination of the Scottish and English flags, and with flags this old there are many variations of size and shape. So these are the specifications that I've chosen to go with. And I will just directly use these numbers as inches, because 30 by 50 inches is already a good size. And I will break the flag up into these pieces, which is a bit different to the modern construction. But the majority of surviving originals appear to be made this way, which is fine. For the pattern I only have to draw a quarter, because all 4 quarters of the flag are the same. I don't need a pattern for the vertical red stripe, so I draw a rectangle 22 inches by 20. And I begin by measuring and drawing the position of the horizontal red stripe, followed by the 2-inch vertical white stripe and then the horizontal white stripe. I then measure and mark where the center of the flag would be and then join a line from this point to the corner. I mark 3 inches either side of this and draw lines again, and this becomes the Scottish cross. And these are the only basic shapes that I will be needing. But before I can use them I'll need to add seam allowances, so I trace around these patterns onto a new piece of paper and then draw my allowances around that. I use 3/8 of an inch allowance, and some edges require 2 of these, and a 1-inch seam allowance for the flag's edges. These are now the finished patterns ready for use. As a quick demo of the seam that I'll use, you'll notice that one side has 2 allowances and the other side has 1 allowance. And I mark the single allowance onto the cutout pieces as a guide, but you don't need to draw the double allowances. I just have here so you can see what's going on. The side with the single seam is placed facing downwards, and the other piece facing upwards is placed along this single seam line, and add a few pins to hold it. These are then sewn together along this middle line on the top piece. Open them out so that both front sides are facing up, and then fold the longer allowance around the shorter one and top stitch it down. The fabric I'll be using for this is 100% cotton, in red, off-white and navy. I personally like to use darker shades of colours for old flags. I begin by drawing around all of my pattern pieces onto the appropriate colours and cutting them out. For the strip of fabric which houses the rope, I will use this lightweight cotton canvas. To draw this out, I measure my flag's height, plus about 1.5 inches either side. And for the width, I will go with 2.5 inches. I then add a 1/2 inch seam allowance to both long edges, and that's it. I'm going to start with the top right hand corner, and I like to lay out the pieces to keep track of where I am. I start by attaching the larger blue piece to the diagonal white. And then I attach the smaller blue piece to complete the Scottish section. Next I will add the horizontal white stripe. And lastly, the vertical white stripe is sewn on. And that completes the top right corner. I will now repeat this process for the bottom right corner, constructed all in the same order as before, beginning with the larger blue piece. Now I have 2 completed corners, and these are simply joined in the middle with the first red stripe. I start with the top corner, but it doesn't matter because both pieces are exactly the same. And then of course the lower half is also sewn on. I now have half of the flag sewn together, and I repeat this whole process once again to get a second identical piece. And I just flip this second piece around, and that becomes the other half of the flag. And these two pieces will be joined in the middle with the vertical red stripe. Again, it doesn't matter which side you do first, because both sides will be attached the same way and they are identical. So at this stage the design of the flag is complete and all sewn together. And the next step will be to seal off the edges of the flag. And to do this I fold over that 1-inch seam allowance and iron it flat, beginning with the right hand edge. I then fold this inch in half to conceal the raw edge and iron it again. I add a couple of pins to hold it in place, and then I sew it down with 2 rows of top stitching. I then do exactly the same thing to the top and bottom edges, leaving the left hand edge open for the time being. And this is how the edges look once they are sewn and finished. The last thing to add is the canvas heading for the rope, so with the flag facing upwards I place this along the open edge. The extra fabric on either end is just folded around to the back and just pinned as per normal. And this is simply sewn on normally along that 1/2-inch line drawn on the heading. And all the extra fabric can just be trimmed off. The flaps on either end are simply pulled upwards and sewn to itself along the raw edge. For authenticity, the rope I'm using is made from jute, and I simply cut a length about 1 foot longer than the flag's height. With the flag facing downwards and the rope lying in place, I fold the heading in half and pin it down. And this is sewn on with 1 row of top stitching close to the edge. For the rope fixture, I'm going to make them into loops. I wind some tape around the end of the rope to make it easier to thread back into the heading, and to prevent it from unravelling. Then it's just a bit of pulling here and there to get it to the size and shape that you want, and I'm going to make my loop 1 inch high. To fix these loops in place, I do 2 rows of top stitching, but you're welcome to do more if you wish. I then do 1 last row of top stitching all the way down the heading to finish this section off. And this is how they turned out at the end. Again, on historical flags there are so many different fixtures, so just take your pick and have some fun.